Sandra Birchmore was murdered by an animal, and you left that animal on the street for 3.5 years. But I want you to help me say her name. Sandra Birchmore!
Sandra Birchmore!
Sandra Birchmore!
Sandra Birchmore!
Welcome back, and thanks for being here. I'm Cassie, and this is A Wicked World. The story I have for you today is one about a woman whose death was ruled as self-inflicted for a long time. Luckily, with the push of many people, the case was re-examined, and now a very evil person sits behind bars. This is the story of Sandra Birchmore. Sandra Marie Birchmore was born on May 13, 1997, to her mother, Denise Birchmore, and her father, who is known only as W. Birchmore. On her father's side, Sandra had no one, as she had never known her dad. Her mother, Denise, raised her alone and gave Sandra the last name of her late husband, who had died years before she was born. Sandra's mother had been sick throughout most of Sandra's childhood, so her grandmother, Claire Gaudette Coughlin, had helped to raise her. According to Sandra's teachers as she was growing up, she had shown signs of neglect, was a very needy child, and would often make up stories to gain attention. Due to this and her tendency to confide in teachers more than her own peers, Sandra was often bullied in school. So by the time she was 12 years old, she was desperate to find a community outside of the classroom. Since she had always respected and admired police, in 2010, when she was close to turning 13 years old, Sandra joined the Stoughton Police's Youth Explorers program. The youth program is among hundreds of such chapters at police stations around the country. It was created by the Boy Scouts of America decades ago, and the program is designed to help teens and young adults who are interested in law enforcement careers to learn about policing. The Stoughton Youth Explorers program was run by Deputy Chief Robert Devine. Also the same year Sandra joined, 2 new guest instructors were brought on. These new instructors were named Matthew Farwell and his twin brother William Farwell. They had been in the youth program when they were younger as well, and both had gone on to become Stoughton police officers. Matthew would later get promoted to detective in 2017. Now Sandra loved being in the youth program, and she remained in it until 2015, the same year that she graduated from Stoughton High School. While she'd been in the program, Matthew Farwell noticed that she did not have a father-like figure and decided to take her under his wing, helping her with homework and spending time with her outside of the program. Then, the year after her high school graduation, Sandra experienced significant tragedy when she lost her mother in May of 2016. And then, her grandmother Claire also passed away the following month, in June of 2016. But Sandra remained strong and she carried on with her life, and in 2019, she took the Massachusetts Civil Service exam and was placed on the eligibility list for the Stoughton Police Force. Shortly after, in 2020, Sandra not only got her own apartment at Canton Woods Apartments in Canton, Massachusetts, but she also began working at East Elementary School in Sharon as a teacher's aide. On top of that, at the end of 2020, she found out some very exciting and unexpected news. She was pregnant. Not long after, on February 2nd, Sandra was a no-show for work, and she didn't call anyone to let them know why she wasn't there. The following few days, she was still a no-show. So on February 4th, 2021, after school officials called Sandra multiple times and were still unable to reach her, they contacted the police and asked them to perform a welfare check. Officers were then sent out to her apartment to check on her, but when they arrived, no one answered the door, and they noticed that Sandra's car was still sitting in the parking lot covered in snow, meaning that it hadn't been moved since a few days prior when it had snowed on February 1st. Unable to get into Sandra's apartment, officers spoke with a property manager, who then let them inside. When they entered, at 11:46 that morning, they would find Sandra's lifeless body sitting in her bedroom with the door closed. She was in a seated position on the floor, a black strap around her neck. That black strap had then been tied to a bedroom closet doorknob. Sandra's phone was lying on the floor about a foot away from her reach, and it appeared as if she had been dead for quite some time. The state medical examiner would end up determining that there were no signs of struggle. No scuff marks or indentations were found on the walls, and there was no drag marks found on the floor. Sandra's body also showed no defensive wounds. Therefore, they ruled that Sandra, who was 10 weeks pregnant at the time, had taken herself out of the world. A subsequent state police investigation found that there was no signs of foul play. Now, for some reason, the state medical examiner did not send any fetal tissue in for DNA testing to determine who was the father. Additionally, even though samples were taken from Sandra's body to see if she had been SA'd, those samples were never examined. Right after Sandra's body was found, her aunt, Darlene Smith, was notified. Authorities told her that Sandra had done this to herself, and Darlene did not believe it. Her niece was so excited about the new little life she was bringing into the world, and Darlene just did not think it was possible that Sandra would end it all. Additionally, Sandra's behavior on the last day that she had been heard from, February 1st, was hardly that of someone who was planning on taking themselves out of the world. After all, she had made multiple appointments and had even gone outside to clear the snow off her car. Her therapist, who had seen her just the day before that, told the FBI that Sandra had never mentioned any thoughts about harming herself or had any ideations leading up to her death. Oddly, Sandra's family would also end up finding something that police had missed at her apartment. It was Sandra's necklace, which was a gold chain that had a flamingo charm on it, and it had been lying on her bedroom floor entangled with a clump of hair. Strangely, this necklace had actually been photographed as hanging off of Sandra's neck in crime scene photos. It wasn't long after Sandra's death that some alarming news began to surface. Apparently, Matthew and William Farwell, along with Police Chief Robert Devine, had been grooming and engaging in inappropriate relationships with Sandra for years. And at the time of her death, she was pregnant with one of these men's babies. That man would turn out to be Matthew Farwell, though he denied it. He also claimed that while he had had a sexual relationship with Sandra, it had not started until 2020, when she was 22 years old. But it was believed that she was 13 years old when the grooming had actually started. So following her death, Sandra's family, more specifically her aunt, started a lawsuit in which she claimed that the actions of these three men had ultimately been what prompted Sandra to take herself out of the world. The lawsuit additionally blamed the town of Stoughton and the police department for their negligence in hiring Matthew and William Farwell. The brothers had both been hired as members of the force, even though it was well known that as teenagers, they had been known to impersonate police officers and had even pulled over a few motor vehicles. Video surveillance footage that had been captured on the night of February 1st at Sandra's apartment building had been looked over by the property manager, and in it they noticed a tall man entering the lobby wearing a COVID mask. He also had his black hoodie pulled up over his baseball cap. This man stepped into the elevator at 9:14 p.m., then came out 29 minutes later and was seen hurrying out of the building. The property manager immediately passed along this tape to investigators, along with some other important information. A woman had called the complex's emergency line, saying that Sandra had told her that her police officer boyfriend had wanted her to get an abortion, or he would, quote, take care of it himself. Authorities now believed that the man they saw in the footage was Matthew Farwell. He had entered Sandra's apartment building at 9:14 p.m., and earlier that night, Sandra had sent a text message to one of her coworkers. The coworker had then replied back at 9:28 p.m., just a minute after Matthew entered the building, but Sandra would never open that message. Apparently, Sandra had told a coworker that she was dating a police officer who was 10 to 11 years older than her and already had a number of children. She additionally told this coworker that if anything happened to her, Matthew had done it. Sandra's aunt and friends had even called the police multiple times after Sandra's death to tell them that Matthew Farwell had the means, motive, and opportunity to kill Sandra, but they weren't listened to. When Matthew was confronted about the security footage, he claimed that he had only gone over to Sandra's apartment that night so he could end things with her. Also, according to him, the last time that he and Sandra had had an intimate encounter was in October of 2020. Therefore, the timeline for him being the father didn't add up. According to him, when he had gone over to Sandra's apartment on February 1st to end things with her, the two began arguing. He called her crazy and she called him a dick. Still, he maintained that not only had he not hurt Sandra, but she also showed no signs of being suicidal when he left. Now, just days after Sandra's body had been discovered on February 9th, 2021, Matthew had been instructed to hand over his phone to authorities. Months later, his work phone from the Stoughton police was also logged into evidence. However, once state troopers performed an extraction on both devices, they curiously found nothing of interest. It was found, however, that Matthew did have a tracking app installed on Sandra's phone to keep tabs on her at all times. Just the day after Sandra's body had been found, Stoughton Police Chief Donna McNamara had grown increasingly concerned about numerous statements the department was receiving regarding Sandra's involvement with the Farwell brothers and Robert Devine, so she had initiated an internal affairs investigation. Within weeks, the private and internal investigation uncovered thousands of text messages that were sent between Sandra and Matthew, directly contradicting the state police sergeant's official report, which had claimed to have found no communication on either phone between them, stating that Matthew had just deleted all the communications that he had with Sandra. A separate report from state police concerning Sandra's laptop mentioned approximately 12 months of iMessages, social media content, and other documents that alluded to sexual relationships with other men, but found no threats of harm from anyone. However, the internal affairs investigation found much more relevant information in the text messages, which showed in fact that there was statutory rape that had happened to Sandra. As a result, the Stoughton police would place Matthew Farwell on paid leave in February of 2021, though they did not press any charges. These messages included one where they discussed the day that Matthew had taken Sandra's virginity, April 10th, 2013, when she was just 15. In part of this text exchange, Sandra tells Matthew that she had butterflies so bad that day, and also that it was the best day of her life. The messages also showed just how particularly proud Matthew was for taking Sandra's virginity, even years later, sending her questions in 2019 and 2020, including, "What was the first day you said, 'Oh my God, I want this guy to be my first. I want to feel him inside me'?" Followed by, "I absolutely would have fucked you" in 2012, when she was just 14. As an adult, Sandra admitted that she had begun thinking about Matthew sexually when they sat in the library together when she was just a teen. But she didn't want to say anything. "'Cause of my age," she texted him. "I didn't want you to be like, no, what the fuck?" Another time, Matthew wrote to her saying, "If I pushed, I absolutely could have fucked you without condoms from day one." To which Sandra answered, "I was kind of scared to say no in the beginning, not knowing how you'd take it." Meanwhile, as Matthew was carrying on this very illegal relationship, he entered into a more legal relationship. And he got married to his wife just a month after taking Sandra's virginity in May of 2013. At the same time, he kept seeing and sleeping with Sandra throughout her high school years, even meeting up with her while he was on duty. Over time, Matthew apparently began using forceful oral, vaginal, and anal sex acts as punishment for Sandra when she got bad grades, slept with other people, or didn't share her location with him. Once Sandra had graduated high school and enrolled in Massasoit Community College's Community Justice Program, her relationship with Matthew took on increasingly violent undertones thanks to his appetite for sexual fantasy role play. "Maybe I'll hold you down by your throat while I pound you," he had texted her in 2020, adding that he wanted her to feel like, "Oh my God, this is really happening and I can't stop it." He additionally shared rape fantasies with Sandra and instructed her to role-play sex fantasies that included pedophilia and non-consensual incest, including pretending that he was her brother sneaking into her room at night. Super fucked up. During this period, Sandra was also having sex with other men, including his twin brother, William Farwell. According to a friend of Sandra's, Matthew had control and dominance over Sandra, while William presented himself as the sweet one, the friend with benefits. It was almost like a very sick good cop, bad cop relationship. One time, Sandra had even been having sex in her car with one of the brothers, when the other brother showed up and got very upset. Around the same time, Robert Devine, the police chief, began messaging Sandra on Facebook Messenger, discussing sex acts with her and planning times that they could meet up while he was on duty. All three men were taking advantage of Sandra by that point, along with having her record and send them pictures and videos of these acts. These men had passed Sandra around as if she was just a toy. But as time passed, Sandra began to yearn for something that she could call her own, a baby. And she talked about becoming a mother near constantly. Soon, she decided that she was going to have a baby no matter what, and began buying pregnancy tests at an alarming rate, even repeatedly borrowing money from her friends so that she could purchase these expensive tests. Finally, in December of 2020, Sandra found out the news that she had so long been hoping for. She was pregnant. She wrote out a sign and marker saying, "Congrats, we are going to be parents," then took a photo of it and sent it to Matthew. She was only 3 weeks pregnant at this point, but was overjoyed with the news. Matthew, not so much. He texted her back saying, "I have literally nothing to say right now. How far along are you?" Sandra replied back, "Regardless of how far, we're keeping it." "Okay, we need to talk then," he replied back. Sandra texted him again, saying, "No shit. That's obvious. And the birth certificate needs to be signed." Sandra had finally realized that she had some power over Matthew, and the source of this power had come from a very unexpected source. Stoughton Animal Control Officer Joshua Heel, who admitted in a civil lawsuit that was filed by Sandra's aunt that he had received oral sex from Sandra on a couch inside the animal shelter, but it was consensual, had informed Sandra that Matthew was expecting a third child with his wife. This news came as a huge blow to Sandra. After hearing this, Sandra decided to confide in Joshua, revealing all the information that Matthew had asked her to keep secret. This included her relationship with him, his brother, and Robert Devine, along with information about the explicit and sometimes violent messages that Matthew would send her. Following this conversation with Joshua, Sandra decided that she was going to write a letter to Matthew's wife and tell her all about the affair. But then she decided that instead of sending the letter, she would present Matthew with an ultimatum. In exchange for her silence, he needed to agree to have unprotected sex with her so she could conceive a child. Matthew would end up agreeing, but said that he wanted Sandra to role play like he was raping her. She seemed happy with this arrangement and even told him that she would stop talking shit about his wife and kids. Therefore, they would both get what they wanted. But not long after, one of Matthew's colleagues informed him that Sandra's friend had contacted the police station, exposing their illicit relationship. This made Matthew panic and told his coworker to keep quiet. He followed this up with an angry text to Sandra, yelling and swearing at her for exposing their secret. Shortly after Matthew found out that Sandra was pregnant, in December, Sandra told her friends that Matthew had wished her dead and wanted nothing to do with the baby. She also told friends that Matthew had put her in a headlock and grabbed her phone away from her. Then in January, Sandra confided in the baby's godmother-to-be, saying that she had shown Matthew the sonogram picture and he had snapped. He said, "That's not my child," then pushed her to the ground. Suspiciously, that same month, he asked for a key to her apartment, which Sandra gladly made for him at a nearby Walmart. When Matthew showed up to get that key, his behavior had raised suspicions in Sandra, as he began to inspect her bathroom and closet. Sandra even texted a friend saying, "It was just really odd. He started looking around. I don't know." But since he had asked for the key to her apartment, Sandra figured maybe Matthew was just coming around to the idea of them having a baby together. Then, on February 1st, 2021, after Sandra found that she was having a snow day from work, she texted Matthew to see if he would come over and hang out with her for the day. He would inform her that he wasn't going to be around. Unbeknownst to Sandra, Matthew's pregnant wife was about to give birth. That afternoon, Sandra had texted Matthew about a baby gift that had been delivered to her Canton apartment, and also shared her excitement about the March baby shower. Then she had ordered DoorDash, picked it up in the lobby at 5:01 p.m., as well as briefly went outside to get the snow off her car, returning back inside at 5:33 p.m. Throughout the evening, Sandra had texted her friends as well as shopped online for baby furniture. Then at 9:08 p.m., Matthew had texted her asking if he could come by for a second. 2 minutes later, she texted him back telling him sure and that the door would be open. 4 minutes after that, security footage captured Matthew entering Sandra's apartment building. Her cell phone cataloged her final steps as being at 9:40 p.m., and it was 3 minutes after that Matthew had exited the building. By the beginning of 2023, Matthew Farwell still had not been arrested. And a Facebook page titled Justice for Sandra Birchmore kept her case in the public eye. It also helped that her case shared similarities to the Karen Reed case, and both were being handled by the Norfolk District Attorney's Office. In the meantime, her family hired a well-known former New York coroner named Michael Baden to re-examine Sandra's autopsy report. He had previously worked on cases such as Michael Jackson and Phil Spector. Then, on June 18, 2024, Michael Baden would announce that Sandra's death had actually been from asphyxiation, and it was a homicide. She had suffered a fracture to a small U-shaped bone in her neck, known as the hyoid bone, which fractures rarely, if at all, in a self-hanging, but does fracture in homicidal strangulation of a woman. It would take nearly 4 years for loved ones, online activists, and ultimately FBI agents to unearth the damning evidence that led to Matthew Farwell's arrest, on suspicion of killing Sandra. On August 27, 2024, the FBI's compelling evidence against Matthew Farwell finally convinced a federal judge to issue a warrant for arrest. The very next morning, he was arrested and brought into custody. Later in September, Matthew would waive his detention release hearing, opting to stay in federal custody, as it's unknown if he had anywhere to go. Matthew's twin, William Farwell, had also been placed on leave in 2022 and had since lost his law enforcement certification after it was revealed that he executed unauthorized searches of the law enforcement database on himself and Sandra, as well as lied to authorities about his relationship with her. Internal investigation reports also show that he knew she was pregnant with his brother's baby, and he continued to have sex with her, including 22 days before she died. He has since left Massachusetts and now serves in the Arizona National Guard. Stoughton Police Chief Robert Devine was also placed on leave in April of 2022, and he would later resign in August of that year, following the internal affairs findings in regards to his relationship with Sandra. Sandra's family spoke publicly after Matthew's arrest, and they said, "Based on our personal memories of her and the stories we have heard from others close to her, it is clear that Sandra had a huge heart and did everything in her power to help those around her. Sandra dreamed of becoming a mother, and we dreamed of watching her become one." They continued by saying, "Sandra was a vivacious young woman who would do anything for those she cared about. Her biggest wish was to become a mother, and she would have been an amazing one." A memorial service was held for Sandra Birchmore on Wednesday, March 3, 2021, at the Immaculate Conception in Stoughton. She was later cremated. Well, thank you for listening to Sandra's story today. I'm glad that she and her family are finally getting the justice that her and her unborn baby deserve. What Matthew and the other officers did to her for years is so vile and unbelievable. They took advantage of a young and vulnerable girl who had no father figure in her life. And once Sandra finally realized that she had some power in one of those relationships, her life was cruelly taken away from her. What are your feelings on this case? So if you like true crime and you want to hear it from me, then don't forget to hit that subscribe button below. And turn on your notifications too, so you'll know when I upload a new video, which is at least 3 times every single week. Thanks for watching A Wicked World today. Until next time, take care guys. Bye. Thank you to all the patrons of A Wicked World. Now, there's even more of A Wicked World on Patreon. So check it out at patreon.com/awickedworld or use the Patreon app. You'll have access to exclusive videos each month and more. Any support truly helps to make sure the victims never get forgotten and to highlight the shortcomings of society associated with each case. Do you have a suggestion for a case you'd like to see me cover? If so, send me an email at awickedworldtruecrime@gmail.com.